Welcome into Courtside Seats with Kroeger, a Charlotte Hornets podcast. Here he is, Chris Kroeger.
I've been looking forward to this for a little while because we've been doing the podcast. This is episode 9 of Courtside Seats, and we've been talking to everybody inside the organization, but we get to step outside the organization. And I don't know if there's anybody better to kind of recap free agency and just talk about everything that's going on in the NBA than this man who's really made it his career. Former Nets assistant GM, longtime front office man in the NBA, now an NBA Front Office Insider for ESPN, Bobby Marks. Bobby, what's up, man? How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well because, I mean, it's kind of crazy. Right here we are. It's early August, and I think we can say with almost certainty the offseason is finally, the dust is settled. Can we say that officially now?
I think we can. Once that Kawhi Leonard trade happened a couple weeks ago, and Clint Capella signed on Friday, there's really not much left out there unless we get some player that wants to get traded
right
in the month of August, and I hope that doesn't happen. I mean, last year we had Kyrie kind of lingered with the medical for a little while.
Yep.
I mean, and with the Kyrie Isaiah Thomas trade, and with Isaiah's medical lingered, and really there's not much. I mean, Rodney Hood is still out there, and Patrick McCaw. Some of these veterans are still out there, but there's not many jobs left for these 30 teams.
I want to talk about free agency and kind of where we're at heading into the season now, because we got a pretty good grasp on it, like you said. So we'll do that in a little bit. But I want to start with you, okay? Because you've got such a cool journey to where you are now, and so, gosh, I guess it was. How long ago was it now? It was a few years ago. I mean, really, the only team you had ever worked for in the NBA. You guys kind of part ways, and then here you are today. You're like a media mogul in terms of being a front office guy in the NBA. So, like, does that feel like it was just yesterday, or does it feel like, man, that was ages ago I was in an NBA front office?
The 3 years have gone by fast, and it's kind of where I was when I broke into the league in '95 as an intern, not knowing what I wanted to do, and working for a lot of coaches and GMs and front offices and owners, and kind of working my way up and having some good teams, not good teams, kind of teams in between. So I can relate to a lot of different fan bases and organizations as far as I've seen a little bit of everything. And then, 3 years ago, May of 15, not having my option exercise and parting ways with an organization I grew up rooting for, and that I kind of basically raised me for a while, and not knowing what I wanted to do. I talked to the Players Association when I was out in Vegas, and I kind of I gave them a little bit of an analogy that it's almost like when you get done playing, you kind of get at a crossroads where you're not sure what you want to do anymore. And I thought I'd eventually go back for, working for a team. I was still getting paid, so I could take some time. But yeah, I caught the media bug a little bit. Started doing some work on, did some stuff with SportsCenter for Mark Stein had hooked me up there. And, and then I took to social media, which when you work for a team, social media is taboo for maybe to follow, but not to tweet. And took to social media. I've always said that I never had the app before. My wife had to kind of introduce me to it. And yeah, I mean, I guess I was a freelance writer, breaking down trades and the finances and, free agency and what teams have cap space. And I had known Adrian, Wojnarowski for a while when he worked at the Bergen Record, and met with him in Vegas in July of 15. And, he said to me, hey, I got this, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm thinking about starting this offsite called The Vertical with Yahoo. We have got people who have specialties. We have shoe specialties, the draft. We've got investigative writers. It's a small group. Would you be interested in joining us? And I said, yeah, I think I would. And then, joined forces with them was there for 2 years, and now I'm on my year 3 in the media, and I just finished up my first year with ESPN, and it's been exciting. I mean, it's different. As I said, I kind of try to represent all 30 teams and try to give different knowledge as far as what people should be looking for.
Well, and so your start, for those that are unfamiliar, you're from Jersey. As you said, the Nets really raised you as the only team you worked for in the NBA, and you started out, gosh, as an intern, right? With PR. What were you doing? You were doing press clippings back then, 20 years ago. What were you doing?
I was writing press releases. I was back then. Back then, I had every morning. I would have to go through the newspapers and cut out all the articles, and then copy them, and then send them out to all our different heads as far as anything relating to the Nets and the league. I did that for 3 months. I had to do it for credit to graduate. Finally graduate. Couldn't get a job. Stayed on another 3 months in basketball ops, which would be illegal now because we do not like free labor in this day and age. Everything has to be credit based, or you got to pay somebody. Couldn't get a job. Worked for Willis Reed, who was the GM at the time, and then got hired in January of '96 basically in the same position, making $18,000 a year, and worked for John Calipari for 3 years, Rod Thorne, Billy King, you name it, and I really started to learn about the CBA in 2000, and kind of built my career up from there.
So I just got to tell you, I'm going to make you feel old for a second. So we still do that, okay? I get that email every day, 9 o'clock on the dot from Natalie Brenneman inside the Hornets PR office. But it's an email now, Bobby. She doesn't physically cut up newspaper clippings. Nobody does that anymore. She sends these things called hyperlinks that you click on and you can read on your computer. That's the way it works now. But that still exists. That's still a job that somebody does.
It does. I mean, a quick story, and then we'll dive into some other things. My first day on the job, it was the end of the season, so they wanted me to do the media guide, the postseason media guide, and I couldn't figure out how this copy machine worked, and I kept on getting it jammed. And I figured, you know what, let me just take it to Staples or one of those Office Depots, and I'll do it there. And it cost, God Almighty, it cost a couple $1,000.
Oh, no.
I got so tired of putting my arm in that machine and pulling out these papers that kept on getting stuck. And I learned a quick lesson on there is a budget went up for a team.
Yes.
And $2,000 worth of copies do not fall under that budget.
Oh man, that's fantastic. So you played football at Marist though. So how does a football player wind up doing an NBA internship? Were you always a basketball guy growing up in terms of like what you enjoyed outside of football? How does that even work?
What I was a terrible student my first 2 years.
Yeah, same here. Same here.
At Marist, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I kind of, the light went on after my sophomore year. When I got to my senior year, I was so far behind in credits that I needed to do an internship. I was a Knicks fan growing up just because we got free cable and MSG was on, was part of that package. And it's ironic, Scott O'Neal, who is now the president of the Sixers, was living in Hoboken, New Jersey with a friend of mine that I grew up with, a group of people from college, selling tickets for the Nets. And I got my resume to Scott O'Neal at the time and wound up getting my foot in the door there and got an interview right before Thanksgiving of '94 and got my foot in the door that way there. And for me, it was just trying to get in with anything to graduate, and it just kind of worked itself out.
When did you realize, because you said you started to get a grasp of, the CBA and the salary cap and all that stuff, when did you really start to get a grasp, or did you ever get a grasp of, man, this is sort of a market inefficiency where there aren't a lot of guys that understand this part of the operation, not only within the Nets, but maybe even NBA-wide, where you realize there are a lot of basketball-type guys, but maybe not guys that understand the business of basketball. Did that ever hit you at an age when you were working in Jersey and then you realized, man, this could be something I flourish at? Did that ever hit you?
No, because I had so many other jobs that I never really kind of took a back seat and said, this is kind of a specialty job, because I was doing – besides the CBA and writing up contracts, I'm not a lawyer. I basically taught myself everything. I was doing the draft. I was doing free agency. I was doing some player development, off-court player development. So there was a wide range of things. I think it's hit me now based on, when I started in 2015 with Yahoo, we didn't have many people, breaking down the CBA and the cap and post-transactional, and how things really, the nitty gritty of things. And now I look around and with the rise of the Athletic,
yep,
and, with CBS Sports, and SI and all these other different entity, that real GM, there's a lot of different people who have kind of who are created their own niche, and I think it's great because I think there's certainly an appetite out there for the fan when a trade or a free agency happens that they want to know. They don't care who breaks it. I think they want to know. All right, how does this impact my team right now, and how does it impact it going forward? And then maybe there's a contract nuance in there that that might be something that somebody doesn't have.
So you tweeted this out. I think this was, I mean, if people aren't following you on Twitter, I don't know what they're doing. What's your Twitter handle, Bobby, if people want to follow you?
Yep, it's at BobbyMarks42.
Okay, so really simple. You should just be following him already. If you're not doing it already, you're not doing NBA fandom properly. So you tweeted this out, and we've got a Kobe story here in Charlotte. We'll share that after you share your story. But
I think we've got a relationship.
Yeah,
us and Charlotte. I mean, myself and Charlotte have a good relationship when it comes to Kobe.
Right. So that's got to kind of. I mean, it's you laugh it off, I suppose now, but that's kind of got to stick in your craw a little bit, I suppose, when Kobe's name always comes up. And that's just his legacy of all the things that people, these slights that he invents against himself. That's Kobe's legacy, right? So you tweeted this out, though. You guys, you were going to take him. And I think Jonathan Abrams did a great job detailing this in the book Boys Among Men. But you tweeted this out that, yeah, we nearly took him. And I'm fairly certain if we would have called his bluff that he would have been bluffing, that he would have played in Jersey and he would have put on a Nets uniform and that he wouldn't have gone to Italy and played overseas, that was just posturing. So, yeah, 96, right? I mean, you guys were really, really close to selecting Kobe Bryant instead of Kerry Kittles.
Yeah, we were right. I mean, it was a draft of 96. That was a loaded, now we look back on it, it was a loaded draft. And it was interesting back then. And I think a lot of it had to do with, so we had just hired John Calipari from UMass. Here was a guy who had never coached in the NBA. The high school players, besides really Kevin Garnett, there wasn't a great track record of players coming from high school to pro. But we brought Kobe in May and June of 96, and you can't do this now, but I think we brought Kobe in 6 times.
Woo.
I mean, we brought him in, and back then, you were allowed to work out draft prospects against your own players if they had, I think, less than 3 years of service in the NBA.
Right.
Now you can't. Now it's, you can only have 6 guys on the court. They've got to be draft eligible. So we had Kobe work out against Ed O'Bannon, who played at UCLA. We drafted in the first round the previous year. Khalid Reeves, who played down in Charlotte, who we had gotten him and Kendall Gill in a trade. I think we sent Charlotte Kenny Anderson.
Yep.
And those 3 guys worked out together. We might have had a 4th in there. And I've never seen a high school kid or, a workout where you knew watching this player was going to be special and dominated consistently the workout there. And, one of the jobs was working being on the floor, rebounding. I picked, Kobe up from the airport numerous times. I went down and watched him play in the state championship in March of 96 there. And, yeah, I mean, we got to the point where, they play the I'm going to go to Europe card a little bit, and we didn't call their bluff, and we picked, Kerry Kittles, who turned out really, Kerry was part of those 2 teams that went to the finals and had a good NBA career, but, he wasn't Kobe Bryant. I mean, plain and simple, and we missed I know Kobe would have come and played. Who knows what would have happened after that for his next contract or beyond that. But I know if we had drafted Kobe that he would have been in a Nets uniform in 96 there. Maybe
I'm misremembering this a little bit because this I think this is what Jonathan wrote about in Boys Among Men, where I think he said that whole exchange, like the days leading up, you guys, you had gotten ownership approval, correct, to actually pull the trigger, and then maybe at the last second, because you guys weren't 100% certain that it would work out and that he wouldn't actually go to Europe and play and all that, that ownership back. Am I misremembering that, or is that correct too, where ownership kind of was on board and then on the day of the draft you guys kind of pulled back and said, no, if we're not certain, we can't pull the trigger on this?
Well, yeah, and we did get ownership approval, and that was hard to do with because we had a group back in the 90s called the Seahawks 7, which we called them, and they were great guys. They weren't, billionaires like we see today, owners, but basically you had to have, you had to have a majority vote approval, and we had a lot of different times that we couldn't get an agreement in place there. So yeah, they had green lighted us to bring to draft Kobe. And the day before the draft, I remember I think it was the Radisson Plaza on Route 3 in Secaucus that we met with Kobe's parents and Arn Tellem, who was his agent at the time. I don't believe Kobe was there. With John Calipari, John Nash, who was the general manager, Michael Rowe, who was the president, and that is basically where, basically where they said that he was not going to come if we drafted him. And 24 hours before the draft, we changed courses and wound up taking Kerry Kittles. Yeah, and what's funny is too. So this is the revisionist history, and Kobe is, he's propagated some of this stuff, Bobby. Like when we selected him at 13. Now everybody looks back and says, well, the Hornets didn't realize what they were doing. Well, we didn't work him out. We had never had any intentions of drafting the guy. And by the way, 12 other teams ahead of us passed on Kobe Bryant, too. So I don't know how we get to be the bad guys on this. But, he puts on the hat, right? So that's what happens. You put on the hat. And that deal was done in advance because we were looking to get Vlade as recently as the previous season to upgrade the center spot, and the deal never went through. And then, the Lakers were very adamant they were trying to shed Vlade to make room for Shaq in free agency. So they were moving on from Vlade one way or the other, and we agreed to that deal in principle days before the draft. We were just waiting for them to say, give us a name, right? You were on the clock, give us a name. This is who we're going to select for you. And that guy just happened to be Kobe Bryant, and now Kobe himself propagates that as some sort of falsehood that the Hornets didn't believe he was that good and they traded him away, and now I want to slight them too. So it's all this stuff is crazy, right? It's like just part of the lore of Kobe Bryant over the years. It is. I mean, I think the story builds every time every time it comes around to the into the draft. And to this day, I know there are the Kobe Bryant tapes that we filmed are somewhere in boxes in my house somewhere that I will find and we'll have good fun with it. But yeah, I mean, it's just the lore of the Nets on the missed opportunities and what might have been if we had drafted Kobe. Well, so this is the other thing, right? And now we're what, 5 years away? It was about 5 years ago since the trade that you guys swung with Boston. So, man, what sort of things have you experienced over the last 5 years? Because I don't know, I almost feel like it's swung the other way now, Bobby, where almost like unfairly the things that have been said about that trade. And I guess you're laughing like, I don't know, it's just so crazy, that trade and all the things that have been said about it, and who knows what's true and what's not true and all that. So, yeah, I don't know, unpack some of that stuff. What are your feelings on that Nets Celtics deal 5 years later? Yeah, I mean, of course, and we had fun with it the night of the draft, with Reese Davis and those guys, and they teased me a little bit. I think they compared it to what the Herschel Walker trade of and the Babe Ruth trade from Boston to New York and stuff. And I think, looking back on it, it is 5 years from it. It's remarkable how time flies. It's crazy. And it didn't work out. I mean, I think you would be, you'd have to come from a different planet to look and see that, it turned into Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, who I give Boston a lot of credit because they did have to draft those guys. So it wasn't like we drafted them and then traded them for Pierce and Garnett. So, I would say that unless you were in the room in late June of 2013, and had worked maybe in the front office before, that, it's hard to, I guess, digest what happened. We were coming off a 7-game loss to Chicago, where the Bulls were undermanned. They were decimated with injuries. I think people forgot that Brookwood had broke his foot in Game 4, and Joe Johnson was injured. I think we had a little bit of arrogance about ourselves that we thought Pierce and Garnett were the missing pieces to this group here. That we would be that Miami was vulnerable, and that we would be a championship team in 13-14. We wound up losing in the second round to the Heat in 5. And that we would be a playoff team for the next, for the foreseeable future. And then when the cap spike in 2016 would come in, we would have a product to sell, sell free agents. We would be a destination there. Would I ever think that, those picks would turn into, top 5 picks? I didn't. I thought that the mindset was always that we were going to keep spending although that certainly gets you into trouble. The following year we didn't bring back Paul Pierce. We signed Bojan Bogdanovic, and kept Andre Karolinka, who we wind up trading eventually to Philly. We got a little bit younger there. We traded Garnett for Thaddeus. Jason Kidd, of course, left for Milwaukee. We had Lionel Hollins, and we tried to piece together a team. That had won 48 wins to that was now 7 games under 500, and now loses Atlanta in 6 games. I would say this, and I said at the night of the draft. I think it all taught us is that if you are going to push your chips to the middle, that you better make sure you have a safety net going forward. I say the safety net is that the players that you trade for are going to be in a Nets uniform when those picks come to fruition. And that wasn't the case. Garnett, eventually retires. Pierce eventually retires. Jason Terry is still hanging around here. And that's where we were. And, then Sean Marks comes in 2016, I want to say.
Yep.
And he had no ties to the Boston trade. And I don't blame the direction that Sean was able to do, where basically they tore it down and was able to rebuild it the way he saw, and didn't have that, that it was an unprotected first and that they needed to piecemeal a team together because they couldn't send a Boston a top 3 pick. Maybe it could have been a top, 10 to 12 pick. And I think Sean could have done that. He could have signed some players there and maybe been stuck in the middle, and that pick could have been in that 8 to 10 range, but he didn't, and he's building that team the way he sees it here. But yeah, I mean, it's a great lesson. I think it's a great lesson going forward that based on could we have protected picks? Certainly. Could we have not done a pick swap? I think so. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I think if I sit here and talk about it forever, I think it'll just drive myself a little bit crazy. We went for it. It didn't work out, and that was the end result there.
Well, and I guess, I mean, you say those picks turn into Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. I think I am in the minority on this, Bobby. I don't view trades that way. I feel like that's unfair to view trades that way because you don't know that in the moment. Because you don't make that trade if you know in the moment 3, 4, 5 years from now, I'm going to have those specific players. Here's what they're going to look like. You wouldn't do that deal, I don't think. So, I mean, do you agree? Do you feel like it's fair to say, hey, those picks turned into those specific players? Because you're dealing in the free form, right? You're dealing in the abstract as a GM or an assistant GM when you make trades like that. The pick is an asset, but you don't know what that pick is going to turn into because there are deals where you trade a pick and that player never develops and you end up winning the deal because you got a tangible, proven veteran in return.
Well, you're right. I mean, because the first year, I think it was the 2014 pick turned into James Young, who's not even in the league right now.
So that's a win.
That's kind of how you look at it. I think a lot of it has to do with, too, and I don't think people realize that when you trade draft picks, when you put protection on the pick, you only have a 7-year, they call it the 7-year rule.
Yep.
So the picks can't go on forever. So when you're giving up 3 first-round picks like we did, you basically couldn't put protection on it because it could not keep on going. I think where we got in trouble was the pick swap, and I've always said that was probably my biggest regret there. But 2 of those picks was to get rid of that Wallace contract, the Gerald Wallace contract there. So yeah, I mean, I think when we did it, that there was an excitement about the deal. It's funny. I don't know if I've ever told this story, but when we had training camp at Duke in 2013, and I remember after the first practice calling my wife and saying, we're in trouble because our second unit had just crushed our first unit. And I said, I don't think this team is going to be as good as advertised here because our second unit had just put a whooping on that. But I think our second unit was pretty good. We had Sean Livingston and Andre Blotz, Alan Anderson, Karolinko, Mason Plumlee, that group there. And I think that kind of set the wheels in motion. And what happened too was we put a lot of pressure on ourselves when you have a rookie coach there. That because of what the future holds and what you had traded, that you're almost forced to go out and make some short-term trades to worry about now and not worry about what the future is.
Bobby, what we've been talking about for like the last 10, 15 minutes, these conversations didn't exist 5 to 10 years ago in NBA circles. They did behind the scenes. Insiders and league people talked about stuff like this. Media members talked about stuff like this. But these conversations were not generally had amongst fans and the public. And now I could argue that this is one of the, these are the things that really people talk about. People talk about contracts, trades, salaries, all that sort of stuff. When did we arrive at this point? When did it become a thing in the NBA where now people want to know about the inner workings of front offices and how a team is built?
I think, when we started was when Miami put that team together in 2010. The big three with Bosh, LeBron, and Wade there, and how they were able to construct it, how the cap worked, and how they were able to fit three players and have them maybe take a little bit of a discount there. I think Dwayne Wade took a little bit of a discount. I think that's kind of where we're talking about. And nowadays, back 15 years ago, once we got through the first 2 weeks of free agency, we were shut down until the end of September. Mm-hmm. I mean, we weren't talking NBA in August or September. I mean, all of us we got married in August. We had kids in August. That's usually how we spent the month. But now it's a thing where 3 weeks ago the possibility of Oklahoma City having a $300 million payroll was the lead item on SportsCenter. What was going to be the domino effect, and we saw what the domino effect. It was Carmelo Anthony being traded, and how was Oklahoma City able to reduce costs? And we never talked about that. Even when I was in the with the at least I think maybe a lot of it has to do with social media, the presence of it now. But yeah, I mean, the NBA is 12 months a year, and the business side of it, not just what we see on the court, has become a big factor here. I
just want to make this very clear. So what Bobby Marks just said is the reason why fans care about salary cap and trades and all that sort of stuff. Andy Ellisberg, right? That's what you just boiled it down to.
Oh, man.
Andy Ellisberg.
The best. Yeah, one of the best in the business too.
Yeah, but that stuff is so valuable, right? Yeah. Like people just don't realize. And he does a lot of the cap stuff for the Heat. That's the name we're talking about. But I mean, yeah, that's now people want to know the inner workings, and that's that guy's day to day. That's his entire existence in the NBA.
Yep. I mean, we never really had specialists back in the day. I mean, we all kind of. I mean, and Andy would say, he did 4 or 5 different things and I'm sure he still does. But now we have, some teams have 2 people to figure out what are some of the loopholes to the CBA that, how can we add players here? How can we add draft picks? How can we do trades that maybe that some other teams have not figured out right now? Especially, a lot of it is that how this cap has risen. When we had the spike in 16, I mean, I mentioned it this morning. I mean, we've got 29 out of 30 teams that have a $100 million payroll. Last year we had 21.
Yep.
And teams are paying because there's so much revenue coming in from the TV end. And some teams are willing to go into the luxury tax, which was taboo 4 or 5 years ago.
The other thing, too, is to me, you look at where we're at from just a content standpoint. I mean, you work for ESPN. You know the game, and now ESPN Plus, which is such an awesome, cool platform that we've barely begun to scratch the surface on. I think people are constantly looking for content. And, Summer League, it was so crazy, Bobby, to go out to Summer League a few weeks ago and see how it's growing and it's becoming, I think, maybe I equate it to what the combine is for the NFL, how, sure, it's about the draft workouts, but it's really about everybody in the NFL coming together, talking, doing deals, agents, GMs, coaches, all that stuff. I think that's where Summer League's going with the NBA. I think it's going to become this thing where it's the convention for the NBA to come together. And sure, there are games going on, and there's some intrinsic value to that, but it's going to be about more than that. I think it's going to be a showcase for the NBA to say, hey, here's what we're doing. We're putting the bow on the end of one season and starting another one and building towards September in training camp and preseason play.
Well, what Summer League's turned out to be is the NFL's equivalent of Super Bowl week times 2.
Yeah.
It's the end of the year. It's after the draft. This year we had all 30 teams there. It's a big convention. There are a lot of times where deals happen. Every team is there. Every front office person is there, and you get, you're going to play 4 or 5 games, and you're there for 11 days. I mean, we never had that in the past where, Vegas is kind of the culmination of the season here.
Let me ask you. This is a very broad question here. Okay, so bear with me. What do you think? Because I hear this term thrown around all the time. But what is an asset in the end? As a GM, give me a GM's perspective on this. What is an asset in the NBA today?
I think it could be looked at different. Way back when, an asset used to be an expiring contract. I think there was a lot of value in expirings, especially for teams that were looking to get off a long-term contract. And if a team had an expiring, I think an asset can be young players. If it's in Charlotte with Malik Monk or Miles Bridges, I think an asset could be with draft picks as far as where, for Boston, potentially having, 4 first-round picks this year. I think assets, of course, could be all-star level players, but as you know, those are rarely moved unless it's like Kawhi Leonard or Kyrie Irving, guys that don't want to be in the situation they are. So I think that's kind of how you look at it. I would certainly start with, if I had to rank them, I would certainly start with the young players. I think those can turn into something. And then go from draft picks down to expiring contracts there. Yeah,
and it's funny because space has become an asset in a way where I think space before, like you had space to spend, now space is a thing that people just, I feel like in theory you just want space, and there are teams that are stacking cap space. There are teams that are, this is crazy, teams are renting cap space essentially now in deals. And that's one of those assets to me, Bobby. Like, to your point, I think young, talented players are an asset that's a flat asset that's valuable in every market, in every situation, regardless of whether you have a young team or an old team or a good team or a bad team. So I feel like some of these assets are weighted differently depending on what your team is and what market you play in.
I think cap space is an asset. I don't want to say for big market teams, because I think we've started to see a little bit that teams like Oklahoma City can retain all-star level players here. You're right, cap space can be rented. I think we see that in Atlanta with the Carmelo contract going there. That's basically a placeholder for the Hawks for next summer, where they'll also have cap space. I think we've learned that cap space can work as a negative sometimes. Mm-hmm. I think we all saw that in the summer of 2016, where some contracts are undesirable now, and I think a lot of teams would like to get rid of those contracts. I think the important thing is to have, as I say, flexibility.
Yeah.
Look at Utah. Utah is a team that did not have flex cap space this summer, but they were able to retain, Derek Favors and Dante Exum. They bring back the whole group, and now you have continuity. You could almost say the same with Charlotte. Yeah, I get it. Everyone labels the Hornets as being in salary cap purgatory. What is salary cap purgatory? You have a team that returns basically your same group, although you don't have Dwight Howard now, which probably could work as a plus based on maybe some locker room chemistry, which I don't think there is a quantified or an analytic number that we measure locker room chemistry. And you add 2 young players with Bridges and Graham, and you bring Tony Parker in. So I think sometimes making do with what you have is sometimes better than what cap space you potentially could have. Every team uses it differently. Brooklyn used it to take back on contracts nobody wanted, but you get a first-round pick by taking back Kenneth Faried. I think what will be interesting now moving forward is that how do teams view the asset of cap flexibility next summer in 2020 when we start to see a market reset from the summer of 2016 and teams start to have that room that they once didn't have? Do teams learn from their prior mistakes here? And we could have 200 free agents next summer with half the league having that asset in cap flexibility. Do
you think we see a market reset because we've gone the other way? I think this has probably been about a 5+ year run where you live in either extreme. You're either a 50+ win team or you're a team that's 50+ losses, I feel like. And there's got to be some sort of market correction, I feel. I grew up here, Bobby, on a Hornets team that routinely won 45 to 50-ish games a year, and they were beloved because we always had a chance, and it was always consistent, and there were always star players, even after LJ and Zoe left, because Glenn came, and then Baron Davis came, and Anthony Mason was here, and it was just always good. They were very good teams, and you knew they were going to have a chance in the playoffs, and that most nights they were going to show up and not only play hard, they were probably going to win. And I don't know, do we see that come back, swing back to the middle where there is a recognition of, you know what, there's something to be said about just having a really quality team with star players that our fans want to show up and watch every night? Do we ever get back to that point?
I think we do, and you're right. I mean, we're in a tricky window right now because where Golden State is, the level they are at, where Houston potentially could be, and I think I give a lot of credit to Daryl Morey last summer when they did the Chris Paul trade, because a lot of teams sat on their hands and said, you know what, we're going to let this Warrior team go on this run for the next 4 or 5 years. And hopefully that team breaks up and Klay Thompson goes elsewhere, and the expenses become too high. Where winning 45 games to 50 games, and I think you're seeing that in Portland now, is not good enough for some fans. Where you say, you know what, we need to tear it down, we need to bottom out, we need to rebuild here. Where getting into the playoffs in the second round, I think is a lot different now than it was 10 to 15 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because of social media and the perception that people have, but there's nothing wrong with being the 7 seed and winning 44 games and taking the 2 seed to 7 games, because unless you really want to bottom out, and hopefully now you're relying on the lottery and the draft and maybe in getting a star player, you have no idea. You're relying on an 19-year-old to do that. So I hope we do get back to that day and age. I think we will. I think the market will reset in 2019, eventually a full reset in 2020. But it'll just be up to the teams how they want to go about spending their money.
All right, let's talk some Hornets for a little bit. So, gosh, it was really 6 months ago now. That's kind of hard to believe. It's a little less, but almost 6 months ago now that Michael Jordan hires Mitch Kupchak to not only be GM, but to be president of basketball operations for the Charlotte Hornets. When you heard that his name was linked to this job and that it was actually going to happen, what did you think, Bobby?
I thought stability. That kind of brings up the first, of course, besides Mitch playing at Carolina and having ties already there, I thought stability was the first thing as far as a proven veteran who has a track record of success with his time in LA, putting together championship-level teams. I know everyone can go back to the summer of '16 with Mozgov and Dangan, but I think we can pick apart a lot of general managers' track record back in the summer of '16. So I don't view that as a fair commentary there. I thought that it's interesting because Mitch inherits a lot. As they weren't able to do much from a free agency standpoint. The first word that when I heard the hire was that it was stability and kind of what's next. We saw what the next was that Steve Clifford's out, James Borrego is in, and then let's see what Mitch can do in the draft, and then with limited resources in free agency.
It's funny just talking to people in the building, Bobby, and people that this is okay. So this is the cool thing about I think Mitch is with the job he's done, and this is smart leadership to me. I think you're right. He's made some changes. Change was inevitable. It was going to happen in some way, shape, or form. But you also need to come in and get a grasp of what's here and what's in place and what you can keep and how you can work with some of the people that have been through the building over the years. And Mitch has done that. And talking to a lot of those people, it's just, man, we talked to Buzz last week, and Buzz was saying, Chris, I can't tell you how meticulous this guy is. And he listens to everybody. He's asking questions. He's probing all the time. He wants input from everybody, but he's also rolling up his sleeves. I don't know how many GMs still do this, but he writes his own scouting reports still. So he's still got other scouts doing the work, but he likes to be old school in the way that he's still watching the tape and going and making visits and writing his own reports up. And I think the credibility factor and the organizational skills, it's so apparent when you talk to people inside our building right now, the kind of stability that you're talking about that Mitch has brought to our organization already.
Well, you're right, and I think it is somewhat counterproductive sometimes when you do have a new hire, especially in a leadership position, and that person comes in and just cleans house here. I think we're seeing it in Detroit right now, where and I worked for Ed Stefanski for a while. They basically have retained all the people there, and I think we did. Yes, there are some changes in Charlotte, but you mentioned with retaining Buzz there. that I think you can lean on him. But it's the people who have been there, and have been through it and know the roster, know the kind of the nuts and bolts as far as what players work and what don't, have a lot better knowledge than somebody that you are bringing in from the outside. And I think that's kind of the approach we see there.
Well, and I thought the trade, so it's funny too, is so that he makes the deal with Dwight, didn't become official until after the moratorium ended. But that right there, a quick decision of, okay, we just talked him from a basketball standpoint, this isn't going to work with what James Borrego wants to do. And, the initial reaction was, well, Mozgov's back. And guess what? No, he's not. That was a deal to lead to another deal, and that's the way a lot of these deals work sometimes. And he stockpiled a couple of second-round picks. By the way, those led to being able to trade up to go get Devontae Graham, who we had a first-round grade on at 34th overall in the second round, and gave you the cap room, the immediate flexibility to give you the mid-level to sign Tony Parker, use a portion of that for Devontae Graham and add a third year on his contract. And then you flip that again and go get Bismack back here, who's a different type of center, and you acquire a couple more second-round picks. And those might seem like little deals, but, that's where it starts, right? Those are the deals that lead to, just from an identity standpoint, giving yourself flexibility in the long term, but also shaping your roster in the short term to be more of what you need it to be.
Well, you're right, and that's why I hate when we grade, when we grade trades, and because the initial trade, there's always a part 2, 3, 4, and 5 to it, and we never grade. Maybe we grade those down the road, but we don't grade it as a whole. And the Dwight trade for Mozgov, it gave you the buffer for Parker. I know that Charlotte was adamant not paying the luxury tax, and really that was the only way to do so, was to be able to. Yeah, it was basically either Dwight or just basically move the Jeremy Lamb contract for nothing and lose one of your better bench players there. The downside, of course, and we all know, is that you take on an extra year. Now it's Biyombo, but I think, Biyombo, basically, has a role either, starting and he's been there before. I know different coaches, or coming off the bench. And then, the draft picks turned into Devontae Graham, Tony Parker. Yes, there was a trickle-down effect. So the initial trade always leads to something else. I think the armchair quarterback could probably say, well, why didn't you just do a buyout with Dwight that Brooklyn did with him? And I don't think we maybe there's a time when Mitch says, we tried, or we couldn't get to a number that we were comfortable with to go out and get a Tony Parker here. That $17 million bites a little bit into next year, but you weren't going to have much room already, because you have your big free agent decision is going to be Kemba and Frank Kaminsky, who's a restricted free agent. So and if you ever need room, contracts are tradable, or they're stretchable. As we've learned, that contracts these days are the stretch provision is a nice little tool that teams have if you ever need to create room down the road. And if they ever needed the room, they certainly could do that with with Biyombo there.
We've talked about this with Mitch, and you can explain this, Bobby. But the thing that was not talked about, I feel like enough, especially nationally, and I get it. It's not a sexy thing, but to me, it is valuable. It is an asset, like we talked about. We got a $7 million trade exception for that trade for Mozgov initially. That's a sizable trade exception. Now that expires in about a year. But for a team that would maybe one way, shape, or form want to do a deal, and he'll keep exploring deals, I'm sure, whatever that looks like. From a GM standpoint, that trade exception, how valuable of an asset is that? And hypothetically speaking, how could you use something like that?
Yeah, it's a trade chip that you have. It's 7.8, I believe, along with Denver. Denver's got a couple big ones from the, from that Wilson Chandler trade. You can. Claim a player off waivers. I think that's a benefit there. I think it could help when we get closer to October with the teams are trying to trim rosters. You can acquire a player that fits in there. I think you have to be a little bit careful based on where you are with the luxury tax there. You can't just go out and sign a player using the trade exception, but claiming a player and trading for a player. And you're right, and you have a full year until early summer to go about doing that. So it is an asset. We had that in Brooklyn or New Jersey plenty of times where we had a trade exception that we created. There was one time we almost acquired Jordan Hill in a trade by just having the trade exception and would have cost us the future second round pick here. But it's a nice little benefit, a little under the radar benefit that you do have.
So you talk about Kemba, and obviously everybody's aware of what's going on with Kemba. But so I'll throw this out to, I don't even know if you know this, Bobby. But so over the last 3 years, and this is a 3-year run where, to me, Kemba has solidified himself to be as good as any point guard in the NBA. And his numbers of 22, 5, and 4, and he's shooting 39% from 3 during this run. The only other players in the NBA to be posting any numbers similar to that, Durant, Steph, and Kyrie. So he's just in elite territory in terms of the usage, how high of a level he's performing at, the efficiency of it. And I mean, I think he's still, in some way, shape, or form, maybe the best kept secret in the NBA.
Well, you're right. I mean, I think it's a lot of it has to do with Charlotte not being, we get caught up with teams that are in the playoffs in mid-April and May. We saw Donovan Mitchell explode, because he was on a bigger stage. And Donovan had a great year. But I think if you put Kemba on that stage, I know they were in the playoffs a couple years ago, that the under-the-radar player that we see in Charlotte is a little bit different in people's in the perception of people. It will be interesting with Kemba. I think we have a little bit of a false narrative that whenever a player is going into his last year of his contract, that player has to be traded. It's expiring because of the uncertainty if that player is going to be commit there. And I think in Kemba's case, I look at it a little bit differently. He is extension eligible. He's not going to sign an extension. I don't even think Charlotte would offer him an extension based on how low his salary is. And how much more he can make in free agency. And he's made it known that he loves playing there. I mean, it's not Kawhi Leonard who wanted to be elsewhere. It's not like Charlotte has a supermax eligible to sign Kemba Walker and he's going to bypass it to go into free agency. Then, yeah, I would probably think about moving him. But he has made it pretty clear that, he wants to win and he loves playing there. But, yeah, you're right. It is the probably one of the under-the-radar secrets in the NBA is the play of Kemba Walker.
And I guess, this is me getting on my soapbox again. A guy deserves more credit not only for how good he is, but when a guy of his caliber, as you're saying, Bobby, says, I want to be, these are his words a few weeks ago, Hornet for life. And he said those words in New York City, his hometown. He said, I want to be a Hornet for life. And there's just not enough of that as much in the NBA anymore, and there's something to be said for that. I think that doesn't get enough attention because, as you said, the outside forces kind of push whatever they think he should do on him, and that becomes the narrative. But that's counter to what Kemba said time and time again.
Well, you're right. I mean, I think, and Kyrie Irving will learn this in Boston this year. I think a lot of it will have to be about blocking out the noise this year for Kemba. And if I were him, I would almost take the Kevin Durant approach, where Kevin basically, I think it was a media day when he was in OKC. Basically, he said, "I'm going to talk about my free agency right now, or we'll address it. And then once today is over, I'm not talking about it during the course of the year." And it wasn't an issue for Kevin. It really wasn't. And I think if you let it linger, city to city, and the same questions, I think it wears on you. But I think if you can kind of nip it in the butt a little bit, the first day of training camp, which is media day, I think that changes the narrative, and I think he's been pretty forefront as far as what his plans are when it comes to free agency next year.
Bobby, we've talked about a lot. We'll wrap it up. I know it's always been your goal to really run your own operation, so I know you're doing the media thing. But when's that going to happen? When's Bobby Marks getting back in the game? What's happening there?
I say this every time I tease people. I know why John Gruden stayed at ESPN for a long time. Yeah. I know why Jeff Van Gundy has been in the we all probably slept a lot better after games when we're in the media, because we do not take the wins and losses home with us. The next day is not dictated there. So I am in a good comfort level as far as where I am right now. But I would say that if the opportunity that made sense for me and my family ever presented itself, sure, I would certainly listen to it, because there's nothing better than trying to put a team together. There's nothing better than going through the draft and free agency and trade deadline process to be part of a team. Trying to really with one goal in mind.
Bobby, it's been fun, and I'm serious. I mean, you've changed the game in terms of basketball analysis. So keep doing your thing, and we'll catch up once the season gets started again. We'll do this again, okay?
Oh, I appreciate it. It was fun. Thank you.
Episode 9 in the books of Courtside Seats with Bobby Marks, ESPN Insider. Spent 20 years with the Brooklyn Nets, the only team he's ever been with. Well, New Jersey Nets, too, but the only team he's ever been with during his NBA tenure, and now he's become a bit of a media star covering the NBA from a front office perspective. So, of course, follow him on Twitter at BobbyMarks42. If you're not already subscribing to Courtside Seats, good news, you can do it right now. If you're in Apple Podcasts, just click subscribe. Make sure you rate and review there. And now you can find us anywhere. You could go and find us on Spotify, in the Google Play Store. Anywhere podcasts are available, you can now find Courtside Seats, including at Hornets.com, the Hornets app, and our official YouTube channel. And you could subscribe there and you get pushed all sorts of awesome new Hornets content that we're posting all the time. Make sure you check that out. So we'll catch you guys back here next week. Another episode 10 of Courtside Seats.